religious dialogue, perspectives from the Sikh tradition, Catholicism, Islam, and we have the new member, the Chat GPT, which is offering a perspective. The basis is common humanity. So we're still struggling what to do with that chat. You know, what can the chat do that humans can do? And theologians are struggling and they're saying, you know, but there's something about the dignity of the human, right? There's something that the chat is never going to be able to get there. It may have some kind of cleverness, some kind of talents, but what is that thing? And I think that theological quest for what is it that makes humans special is part of that call for conscience, and it's part of what we're looking for in this dialogue, right? What is that special thing? So we heard from Shiva, we come from the same family, and that was so resonant with the recitation of the Quran, with which Hafiz Ikhlas began us today. We come from a single soul, and we are created in nations and tribes so that we can come to know each other. But freedom of religion, it sounds very good. You know, and in America we used to think freedom of religion, it's what we have, that everybody can practice their religion. And the state, it's guaranteed in the Establishment Clause of the Constitution that we would not be, you know, forced to abandon our religions, or any one religion would not dominate. But today, there is a new kind of freedom of religion, right? That is kind of a pushing back, at least in the American context, right? And saying, well, I'm free to practice my religion, and that does not mean that I need to respect somebody who is diverse or has a diverse set of behaviors. So that's kind of a segue to Pope Francis. We heard in his declaration of joy of love, that complexity of the moral discernment of the individual in these complicated situations. So I think the purpose of one of the purposes of these parliaments and the dialogue is how we can learn from one another to navigate these complex situations. We heard, perhaps from the chat, that we need to have moral compass and engage in inspiring acts of justice. But what about when human and religious ideas differ on these points? So again, we were reminded by Dan Olson that we live in a time of discord and division, and we need to search for what is common. And I appreciate that we also need to hear from, you know, the Parliament went through its own crisis. Like, what is a religion? Who gets to, I remember in the 90s, you know, are like earth, you know, the earth movement, or are these new religions, or are the nuns, are we nuns, like, you know, not Roman Catholic nuns, but those who say maybe I'm spiritual but non-religious? Can we also hear from their perspectives? So dialogue is an opportunity to learn from others, as we heard from our panelists, and also to appreciate the integrity of our religious traditions. I think that's part of the struggle that is going on, for example, in the United States today, with the new idea of freedom of religion. How can the resources, or how can those who strongly identify with the traditional teachings and values of their religion, still participate, if you will, in a modern, postmodern, secular societies where other perspectives are there. How can these things be put into dialogue? So finally, we heard from Professor Inam al-Haq of early Islam and those values of inclusivity and the calls for social justice, the practical institution of social reforms, of economic opportunities for all, that even in the Islamic legal system, there were common values that all humans could identify with. Calls for dignity, for freedom of expression, for protection of property. So the final theme, I think, that we heard from a couple of our panelists, and maybe all implicitly, wow, I should have started with this, the idea of the modern. Because we heard from Shiva Singh, right, that Sikhism is modern, and that in a way that's kind of like the good modern, right? Modern, you can see it, it's right there. And then we heard from perhaps Inam about the not so good modern, right? The secular, like, is the modern the time of the decline of religion, and sort of maybe the flip side of that. And then we have the chat. The ultimate modern, is the modern going to be the era of the machines, and are the machines going to take over? And we also, I think, have an interesting, perspective from the Catholic tradition. Catholicism as a model that perhaps other traditions can be in dialogue with, of how to keep those traditional teachings and values and institutions, and yet respect the complex challenges of the modern and the individual freedoms to negotiate their faith in these changing times. So with that, I'd like to help open the floor to questions. Thank you very much.